working at Whole Foods Market in New York. And my boss, yes, who had found me exciting, would give me, because he wanted to lift me from the floor selling fruits to managerial, because every month they used to do this thing called a mystery shopper, where someone will come to the shop and the one who is nicest to that person gets $100 and get billed. I won it consistently for 5 months. So it's like, this is different. So they wanted to lift me to managerial and give me a bit more responsibility. Then they realized that I could not comprehend what was written, or I could not reproduce it under pressure. So then they pushed me to the psychology department, and then they diagnosed that, he has dyslexia. But growing up, growing up,
they took you to prayer camp.
Yes. So my father was one of the very smart accountants that Nkrumah to Italy to learn accountancy. That's how he used to call it. So he's a chartered accountant. And my mom was a teacher. But I grew up until about I was 10 or 12. I couldn't read my ABCs. I used to say M-N-E-O-P for M-N-O-P. So they used to beat me. When going to school was like, immediately I heard the word school, I started producing cortisol in my system. And every day I had stomach aches because my mother, who was a teacher, had told her friend that meaning that all my child wants to do is play. So please, beat him for me. So at class 1, so at class 1, her name was Mrs. Boama. Mrs. Boama would hit me in the head. Wabong. Every time, you are dumb. So I am even crying. So class 2, class 3, they changed my school because my father, who didn't understand. So I would come home with the homework, and then my father would also beat me because he couldn't fathom why he's so smart. If you ask my father, what is 5,464 times 8? He'll tell you instantly. And he couldn't understand why his son was so down. So at a point, they had to ship me to my grandmother because both of them couldn't handle it. So they took me to my grandmother. My grandmother was uneducated. And so whenever I came back home with homework, my grandmother would come and stand in the middle of their house and scream, homework! Oh! Meaning whoever can help should help. So there were some secondary students in the school in Kumasi who would come and then help me out. So I went through a lot. Then they took me to a school in Kumasi called King's International, one of these experimental schools that are trying to teach children to acquire parrot learning. Immediately you get to the school, spell immediately. Spell exacerbated. So they teach you to spell big words, and now your parents are happy. So they took me to that school. And in the morning, they did something called dictation. And that was more kings in my head. And then I realized that it wasn't just about reading and learning, it was also about maths. I also had dyscalculia. So I didn't multiply 2 times 2, 3. So I grew up depressed. I do not like to revisit the childish me because it's a completely broken up personality. So I went through it. When I finished my O-levels, I had 9s in everything. I had all 9s. My father looked at my results and cried. He was tearing up. But this is in 92 when hip-hop music had become the jam and everyone was catching the fever. So I went to a young man in my neighborhood called Lord Marcus. And Lord Marcus would use my interest in rap music to tease out my academic powers. So that's my story. Wow! So when I met Lord Marcus, I told Lord Marcus I want to rap. And then he said, bring your O-level results. So for a week I couldn't. But then I gathered up the courage and I went to show him my results, and I had 9 in everything except account, which I had 2. So he said that if you rap music is for smart people, so if you are not smart, you can't rap. I said agreed. So he would, now when I was finally able to convince him to teach me how to rap, he would give me a storybook and teach me a concept, metaphor. And he said, go and underline all the metaphors in the book and bring it back in 4 days. So I'll go and read it. And then the next 4 days, you teach me alliterations, oxymoron, simile. So in the course of a year, I have read so many books, romance, tragic comedy. I've read so many books that I was now confident, and his reading had already introduced me to cities, Paris, Johannesburg. It had introduced me to cultures, diverse, languages, philosophies. He made me read everything from politics to governance to, he introduced me to a lot of things. And so when I did my, in Ghana, there's something we call the Second World War. If you fail woefully, you do a second world. So when I did my Second World War a year later, I had 1 in everything. Wow. Yes. So I did my 6-4. Then that was when I realized that, okay, I wasn't ashamed to let people know that I couldn't read, I couldn't add, I couldn't write. So from that time, so this one will be in 80 or 92 or 92. So from 92, I became confident because that idea that I couldn't read and write and that it depressed me was no longer depressing me. So I became confident that even though I couldn't, it's in my past. But then I realized that Lord Marcus had used something that I was completely interested in, which was rap music, to lure out, my passion, my power, my purpose. So I would say that, but I started speaking about dyslexia openly, maybe about 3 years ago. But when I had my son, I was looking out for it, but unfortunately, he didn't have it. He's not as creative as
I was just about to ask you about that. That as a parent, once you get to know that you have dyslexia, there comes a point in time where you're thinking, would I pass it on?
I think I passed something else on. I passed ADHD on to him. Yes, that we are working on now. But my son is eloquent. He writes. He is smart, just like the mother.